Hello, everyone. You're welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Ada Aquari, but you can call me the Warrior Mom. Today, I'll be sharing with you how my journey to being a special needs mom started. For some of us, actually, for some mothers, this journey started while their baby was in their womb. Whilst for some mothers, this journey started after the baby was born, and for some, years after the baby was born, maybe a year or two. How did it start? I had my son at 31 weeks because I had preeclampsia. My blood pressure was off the roof. Um, it wasn't being managed properly, so I traveled out to have him. I had planned to anyway. So when I got there, I don't think I stayed for more than 2 days. By the second day, I had gone to the hospital because his movement was limited, and so we had an emergency C-section. I had my son. He was in the incubator because, of course, he was born really early. Discharged after 11 days. Came home. Was growing so well, eating so much, and at about four months, I realized that the neck control he was gaining was declining. Yeah, and so I went to the pediatrician. I was back home already in Nigeria. I went to the pediatrician. He said, "Oh, madam, you don't need to compare your son to a full-term baby now. Their milestones are different." I said, "Okay, no problem." And I went home. At about 7 months, it was there was no improvement. And my mother-in-law said, "No, we need to go back." And this time around, they followed me, three of us. And the pediatrician said the same thing, but of course, they were not having it. So my mom took me to a teaching hospital where we saw a pediatrician who sent us for a transfrontal scan. When the results was out, I saw hydrocephalus. I'm like, "Oh, what's that? I've never heard of it before. Nobody has ever mentioned that name before. So what's the meaning of that?" And then she said I need to see a neurosurgeon, doctor for brain, surgeon, surgery. I went to see the neurosurgeon. And of course, he said my son needed to have surgery. I said, "Wait, what is hydrocephalus, first of all? Why does he need to have surgery?" The doctor said, "Oh, it's water in the brain." He didn't say more than that. He didn't take his time to explain to me. He just told me water in the brain and it is dangerous and an emergency. And so my son needed to have surgery. He even said, "Oh, the hospital doesn't see it as an emergency, and so they will delay to do the surgery." And that I needed to make a decision fast. He has a private hospital he can refer me to. That if I come go there, I should tell them I'm from him and everything necessary arrangement to be made, and my son can have surgery immediately. And besides, the hospital has lots of things to help my son recuperate. Mistake number one. I went and my son had the surgery, and when he came out, I said, "Please, how was the surgery?" He said it was successful. My son will be out in a few minutes, and good news. He didn't really what he was anticipating is not what he saw. That he just saw that a blood clot was blocking one of my son's ventricles, and so what he did was an ETV. Now let me just give a brief um, summary about hydrocephalus and surgery. Hydrocephalus is water in the brain. Do you know that our brain washes itself every day? And then the water will just pass, our body absorbs the water. We have four ventricles, four channels for the water to move around the brain and it to absorb itself. You know, Abby. You're welcome. Oh, it was me too. I don't know. Anyway, so he said my son had a blockage between the third and the fourth ventricle, and so his head is retaining the water. Instead of it to go out, his head is keeping his own. And so they needed to open like a pathway for the water to flow through the spine and absorb itself, and the body will absorb it. So I said, okay, so he said, no. So I was explaining the two different types of surgery. So the second surgery is a shunt. A shunt is a device that they put in the baby's head. Now, just imagine a shunt is a straw. Yeah, I can liken it to a straw. It's a straw. So the straw is, there's a little piece of the device that is in the head, inside actually. and under the skin, the shunt is passed to the back of the ear. So you see a little incision there that they will make, and then through the chest to the heart or to the abdomen. Now, like I said, it's you just see it under the skin, right? So usually the heart, from what I read, is mostly for elderly people who have this condition, while for children, most times is to their belly. So the water passes, that fluid that washes itself passes from that shunt to the belly. It absorbs itself and repeats. So those are the two types of surgeries that I read on Google. And the doctor said he did ETV. In as much as I was like, okay, so my son doesn't have the device, I also wondered why ETV? I mean, what I read on Google, they said the ETV is not for babies because babies are growing. That place will close again because their body identifies it as maybe something, an error, and it just closes. It's usually not for babies. It's usually for children maybe above the age of 2 or for adults. They don't usually do it for babies. And he was about 7 months old that time. But the doctor said no, that it doesn't need the shunt. We know how we know how doctors answer questions. They are angry when you even call Google. And he said that was the best thing he did. And so my son was fine. 2 days after, my son said, I started noticing swelling around his forehead, and I was like, what's going on? He said, oh, it's just the excess fluid is from the surgery. And he administered antibiotics. And next thing, excuse me, one of my son's eyes had closed and it was swollen, it was puffy. I said, what's going on? We said it's just the surgery that they're going to add more antibiotics. And so, actually, within days, it started to reduce. And he said, oh, after 5 days, he said, I can discharge you guys, and all that. Your son is doing so well. He'll be fine. Just start therapy and just to help him catch up with his milestones. I said, okay, no problem. And that we should come back like 5 days after to remove the stitch. I said, okay. We went home. 5 days after we came back, we called. They said the doctor was not in the country, traveled. I was like, traveling, how can you do surgery and travel out of the country? You shouldn't schedule a surgery around the time that you are not going to be around now. Or you at least would have gone to somebody else. But they said, oh, the nurse, the receptionist said there's a doctor that is already going to attend to us. We went to see the doctor. He said, oh, the nurse is going to take out the stitch, don't worry. And so we went to meet the nurse. She took out the stitch. We went home. I noticed that there was another stitch that was poking out of his incision. Like you see the place that they've taken out the stitch, but there was one that was popping out. And I said, babe, see, I told my husband, if not, there's still thread. Let's go back to the hospital and show them. Went back to the hospital. We saw the doctor. The doctor said, oh, no, just cut it off and let them go. That is fine. And then the nurse just pulled the thread and cut it. And it was like we opened the floodgates of water. My body was filled with the cerebrospinal fluid. So they were cleaning and cleaning, and the next thing the nurse brought gauze and used plaster and pressed it down and sealed it. So we went home. But I could see, like, after a day or two, the swelling on my son's head was pushing the gauze, and he was crying like someone that had headache. He was crying. So that is frontal. So a frontal, where the baby, the breathing, you see a newborn baby. Now that place doesn't close until 18 months. That area of my son's head was swelling with fluid. I took him back to the hospital with my husband. He said, oh, we're going to take it out manually. I said, okay. So they will sterilize themselves, the areas around, and they will use a syringe to draw it out, pour it, draw it, and they will do that repeatedly until the head is now, that frontal area is flat. And with the first visit, they did the same thing. Second visit, they did the same thing. I'll be calling the doctor, the neurosurgeon. He won't answer me. But when I get to the hospital and tell them, see what's going on, the doctor will call him in front of me. Oh, and I would actually, he will talk to the doctor, but and doctor will still tell me he said, and I'm like, why is he not even talking to the parents? At least you are the one who did the surgery. Tell us what's going on so that our minds can calm down and understand. He never took my call or my husband's call for one day, even my mom's call, nobody. But he will take the doctor's call. All my focus at that time was just this boy, please, whatever it is, just know what you're doing with him. And the doctor now said, oh, he said he will do another surgery when he comes back from his trip and that he'll be back in 3 days. I said, another surgery. My husband just bought tickets and we left Nigeria that night. When we got to the US, I went with my mother-in-law. When we got to the US, we went straight. We just dropped our bag at home, because she has relatives. Dropped our bag and went straight to the emergency. My son had surgery that night, and now this was no longer surgery to do hydrocephalus. It was surgery to correct the previous surgery, and they told me they were going to do it in stages, and I was like, so my son had the very first surgery, um, but instead of being shunted, remember I talked about shunting. Instead of being shunted inside, my son had to be shunted out into a bag because they needed to drain. So I won't, they drain. They were trying to drain the fluid that was a lot in this around the skull area, and so he was draining into a bag, and because of that, he had to stay in intensive care unit to avoid infection. So he was shunting into a bag, and we were there for like 2 weeks, and they took him in to now shunt him outside the brain. So he was shunted inside the brain and then shunted outside the brain. So they shunted him outside the brain into a bag again. Meanwhile, all this while he was um there was this wire. He was connected to a machine, and that machine was to check the pressure in his brain. It can't go below, it can't go above. If it goes below or above, it's going to alert the doctors. So while they were doing all of that, he was attached to connected to a machine that could see the pressure in his brain. So the second surgery was to shunt him outside the skull, outside the brain, into the bag. And so, of course, we remained in ICU because it's risky. A part of his head is open. You don't want infection. Not open like this, but there's something out now. So it was wraps and all of that. So you need to be very careful. So my son had that second surgery, which was the third in total. And then now it was time for us to do the what's it called, the fourth surgery to now solve the hydrocephalus problem, and they were going to put a shunt, and they did put a shunt. I was so happy that this was finally over. We could go home. They put a shunt in. My son, I could see the stitch here, and I could see that it was in his belly, and if you touch his neck, I could feel the straw-like thing. And of course, he was peeing a lot because the body was absorbing it, like that. So my son had that surgery, and we were transferred to a rehabilitation center for therapy, just to you know just to start the therapy in order to see how fast he can catch up on his milestones. 2 weeks after, I noticed my son was, it was like he was having a relapse, and I was like, what's going on? He's drooling, it's not himself. I went back to the hospital. Another MRI was done, and we saw that he needed another surgery. His body did not accept that shunt, and it was draining too fast. So a fifth surgery was done, and this time around they put a programmable shunt. Now, the programmable shunt is a device that will not require my son to keep having surgeries back to back, because they will keep growing. So you don't want to say, oh, today if I put this shunt, the body is going to be produced. If you set it according to, maybe you set it to drain at 2, and the child is now like 6 years old and he needs to drain at 4, you're now going and remove it. And so no, they didn't want him going back and forth. He had had five brain surgeries, and with all the terms they were telling me about the areas being soft, being, there was one of these, that's for another day. So the area around this going back and forth, they didn't want to have that anymore, and so they put the programmable shunt, such that as my son grows, I take him back, and they use the device to change to 2. So it's a magnetic device. They can use it to change the settings. And so he can't go around anywhere that has a magnet, because it can change the settings by itself. And that was my son's fifth and final surgery. It's just step one of our journey. There were other incidences that happened, and I will be sharing that with you in our next video. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, to like, to share, and also I would love to read your comments as well. Remember, this is a safe place for everyone who has a child with special needs, everyone who has someone that they know has special needs. all we are doing here is to build a community of love, of empathy, and of course, helping one another. Till next time.